Morning guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Ferrari have another test on the horizon for the SF25 as they try to find a way to salvage this season with at least a race win between now and the end of the year. But also, what's going on with Christian Horner, and could a Ferrari link potentially be in the pipeline? Rumours emerging as to where Horner might potentially go, given that he's now officially been paid off from Red Bull, and we believe that he can start working and intends to start working in F1 again from the middle of next year. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Let's start here. Ben Sulayem is at it again, talking sense. Can you believe it? It's funny, isn't it, how Ben Sulayem, many things we are not on board with his perspectives on, but when he talks about sprints and a 12th Formula 1 team and V8 engines, to some extent, I think he's kind of on the money. And he talks about sprint races and says, I also think about the additional burden this places on our staff. They already travel a lot. We have to ask ourselves whether this is a good thing. Now, I guess I get that perspective. Then again, it's not like the Grand Prix weekends aren't happening. Okay, the stewards have to be there for an extra race for the sprint rather than elsewhere. I do get the general thought process behind his assessments. Look, I agree. I don't want more sprints. But do I think his particular angle is the most compelling reason for no sprints? Not necessarily. Christian Horner is looking to make a return. We'll dive into where that might be in a second. Before we get there, I want to talk about his former driver, Max Verstappen, because Max has had quite the couple of weekends. He won in Monza, emphatically broke a load of records, fastest lap, fastest race, whatever, of all time in Formula 1. The weekend after, turned up to the Nordschleife, secured his Permit A. Then the weekend after that, turned up to Baku, dominated the Grand Prix weekend, and all of a sudden there's talk about potentially a title charge being back on for Max. I will say Max has done us all a favour in at least keeping this season interesting, because for a little while there, it was like, damn, this Piastri-Norris title fight, especially after, Monza really. Even Monza, people were starting to talk about Max, but it felt pretty implausible that he could actually do it at that point. Now it's unlikely, but it's no longer implausible. I think that Max Verstappen could make this comeback happen. But it was so underwhelming, right? Because you've got this Piastri-Norris rivalry, which isn't really a rivalry because they don't really seem to have a problem with each other. The team is just manipulating whatever happens on the track. So, things were rather underwhelming. All of a sudden, Max has injected a bit of life back into this season. And what he's doing is incredibly impressive, because having just won Baku, he will then return to the Nordschleife to race in LNS this weekend. So he will be racing in his GT3 Series debut, which is very exciting to follow. So, look, it's always race week when Max Verstappen is about. So he's going to race this weekend, and the weekend after, he's going to turn up to Singapore to try and conquer that track for the first time in his time in the sport. Just quickly on George Russell, because he's still not got a contract, and it's probably not going to happen in the way that he wants it. Russell would like a 2+1. He'd love a 2+1. Toto Wolff is like, well, 2027. Yeah, George, nice P2, but who was P1 again? Who was that? Oh yeah, it was Max. That's my darling. That's my baby. That's who I want in my team. So, look, George can do everything, right? I mean, George had a mega in-lap, and even Allison says, we gassed up George's pit entry. This saved him, compared to most drivers, about a second. Like, that's a lot of time to say right coming through the pits. So he took all the risk here. I'm guessing there was a comment in the race director's notes that you can cross this white line, because people were like, oh, it should have been a penalty. But if the pit lane notes say that you can do it, then I think you can do it. Some were saying that his rear wheels might have been still on the line, but I feel like he probably was all four wheels over the line, but if it says in the notes it's fine, then I think it was fine. So anyway, I don't think the stewards mind too much about that type of stuff. But Russell, very attacking, but also Allison gives him credit, because it wasn't just the attack to the pit lane, it was actually the in-lap that he did a mega job on, according to Allison, and that was what allowed the overcut to happen in addition to the great pit entry. So that was pretty mega from him. But again, it doesn't really matter what George Russell does. It's not going to be enough, right? Because Verstappen is Verstappen. And there's talk about the progress on the W17, of course, next year's car, under the leadership of Allison. The technical staff successfully discontinued the project well ahead of schedule, which is pretty interesting. So they've given up hope on the W16 a long time ago, and they're fully focused on next year's car, potentially earlier than some other teams. I just wanted to get into, before we discuss the Horner stuff, a bit of drama, because if you guys saw yesterday, Leclerc at the end of a challenging Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Hamilton nearly led him through but didn't on the line, and Leclerc came on the radio to say, he can enjoy that 8th place. I don't really care, but it's just stupid because I gave up the position. He should have given it back. Whatever, right? It doesn't really matter. What it has done is stir up a little bit of rivalry between some of the fan bases here. I found this kind of entertaining enough to mention it because we've got a Hamilton fan here saying there's a reason why he's only got single-digit wins and 0 championships. You know, there was this one, I think, it's got 16 in the name, so clearly a Leclerc fan, saying that Leclerc's winning basically he can enjoy that P8, maybe try in Spanish is what he said about the drama with Carlos when he was teammates there. And then a 44 fan goes, congrats, you're winning the championship for the best quotes. There was this fan that said Hamilton fans are crashing out because they realise that Charles isn't Bottas. And then there was a quote tweet that said, well, actually, Bottas had more wins. So, it's been getting kind of spicy between the Hamilton and the Leclerc fans, probably expected. Are we going to see that on the track as well? We haven't really seen much of it so far. I think we would have had it this season had the car been any good. But as a result, of course, it's not been. Now, this, talking of Ferrari power, is potentially Christian Horner's next destination. So, what do we think about this on the surface? Horner is officially no longer with Red Bull Racing. He's been paid off to the tune of, we think, about 60 million euros, 50 million quid. There was some talk up to potentially 100 million US dollars. It's a big payday, right? And fair enough, Horner built that team from scratch. Still, even today, the success that they are having, I know that there's, people out there that will say, good that Horner went, he was dragging them down, and, they've made progress since Horner's gone. But, none of this would have been possible without Christian Horner in the first place, and there's still many at the team that recognise that reality. Now, Horner is very much so a man who believes in there is the talisman and everyone else listens to him. He wants control of everything under his domain. That will be, and that's how he's had success. Other teams are not necessarily like that, and they do not necessarily want to give up that level of power, which is why the rumours around where Horner could go are quite interesting. The rumour says Horner wants to come back. He thinks there's unfinished business. He wants to go into a new team and say, I can do it again, effectively, right? And look, the Jaguar team, what became of that, the way that Horner was able to recruit, build up to the point where they've now got their own power unit division, they've got Red Bull Technologies, they've got all these spin-off companies of which Horner was the CEO and boss. So that's one of the reasons why he got such a massive payday, but he believes that his method works, and he thinks he can do it elsewhere and build up teams to success. Now, whether he wants to do that from scratch, that is one question. There are other potential candidates too. We've talked about, what about Aston Martin? Aston Martin could make some sense. They want to get Verstappen, although I'm sure that Jos Verstappen would have something to say about that. They've got Adrian Newey. Maybe the relationship with Horner there was a little fractured at times, but it would make some sense that Horner would be interested in Aston Martin. They would certainly give him a lot of money. They would probably be willing to give him some ownership as well, as they have done with Newey. And we know that Lawrence Stroll will pull out all the stops, right? He's not afraid. Ferrari, politics. Those two things go hand in hand. Lawrence Stroll doesn't really want to work like that at Aston Martin, right? If he wants something to happen, he will make it happen. Now, whether Horner wants, that's a different question. There's also the possibility of Alpine as well, the Briatore relationship. There's maybe something in that. But I think Horner does want to take some ownership, right? I think that is absolutely critical. I actually think it was one of the reasons for his downfall at Red Bull is that when Mateschitz died, Horner got involved, as did many others, to be fair, so maybe it wasn't Horner's fault precisely, but he got involved in the power struggle, right, for control of that organisation. And he would have loved a world, I think. There were rumours he was speaking with Yovidia at the time, the 51% owner of Red Bull, to say, hey, look, just give me the team. I will take the team away from Red Bull Racing, or away from Red Bull, the brand. Red Bull Racing will be a separate entity that I would at least have some ownership of. I think that's what Horner's wanted because he's seen the fact that Toto is a billionaire running this playbook at Mercedes. So Horner wants, I'm pretty sure where he goes, he wants ownership. Now, Ferrari will not give him ownership, right? It's Ferrari. But also, it's Ferrari, right? So maybe, he would be happy to make that sacrifice if Ferrari were interested. But I think he would have to be convinced that Ferrari were willing to say, you know what, our program has not worked for the last 2 decades. Horner, can you come in and fix it, please? Because Vasseur, as much as I do think I rate him as a team boss, I still think he is being very much handcuffed by the politics and the top level at Ferrari. And I don't really see any massive changes under his helm that Ferrari needs, let's be honest, if they want to be a consistent championship threat. We'll see what happens next year. I wouldn't say I'm especially optimistic about Ferrari's prospects. Horner's left Red Bull. The Daily Mail say that Haas are interested. There's been some talk about Cadillac as well, but apparently Haas is the new player. The Daily Mail say that there are several reputable sources that Horner wants to become a shareholder in Haas and take on the role of team principal. This would give him a similar dual role to Toto Wolff's. Shock horror, right? Like, that's exactly, I think, what he wants. So this is very interesting. Now, would Haas be the best option for Horner? You would think not necessarily, right? Do they have the most investment? Do they have the most staff? Are they reliant on Ferrari and all these other things? Yes, maybe Horner sees a vision there. We also know that they've got the relationship now with Toyota Gazoo Racing, partnered with Haas. So there are reasons to believe that there could be some serious investment coming in. And if Horner was at the helm, maybe he feels like he can actually make that team a serious force. Would be exciting to see. I think that Cadillac, again, would be interesting for Horner. There were rumours that they might have been interested, but, could it be a bit too corporate? Possibly. I think, maybe Alpine, but also Aston Martin, I think I'd be interested in if I was Horner, because I would expect to at least have a lot of power. Ferrari is very alluring, and, it would be fascinating to see Horner become the TP at Ferrari and what he could achieve there. But I just don't see it. I don't think it fits Horner's vision for a team. That's why the Haas thing has absolutely come out of nowhere. But from a couple of angles, I can kind of see it, right? Like, I see a world where Horner comes into Haas, he takes some ownership of the team, and this is, okay, let's build this from the ground into trying to be a championship contender. I think the Toyota partnership would have a big thing to do with that, trying to convince Toyota to come into Formula One, effectively make Haas the Toyota Works team. If I was Horner, that's what I'd be looking to do. So we'll see. I don't know. That's just a few theories from me that I would throw out there. But if Horner joins that team, he's not going to join them if he thinks they're still going to be driving around at the back of the grid, fighting for, scraping points on occasion over the next few years. So that is the Horner piece of the day. Let's talk about Max a little bit, because the Mercedes guys are yapping about him again, especially Toto Wolff, as again, surprise. Toto's still going on about Max, right? So F1 guy Dan talks about the fact that he's now got 7 podiums this season, near enough his 8 that he had back in 2022. But as George says, Red Bull have certainly picked up the pace as of late, and Toto Wolff even goes as far to say that this championship is well and truly on. Max is 1 Piastri DNF away from being back in contention. The gap is 69 points. Assume there's another Piastri DNF and another Verstappen win. That gap becomes 44 points, which is actually exactly the same gap between Norris and Verstappen as it stands, and a 44-point gap with 6 rounds to go and 3 sprints. Again, it's not ideal, but it is potentially doable, right? As Toto says, things need to work out in his favour, but you can see a DNF for the championship leader and everything, and Max scoring 25 points, so that can swing quickly. So pretty funny, right? It seems like Toto wants Max to win, right? And I think that kind of makes sense. He doesn't want McLaren, because McLaren have, let's be honest, embarrassed Mercedes over these last couple of years. If McLaren then end up winning both championships this year in an absolute landslide, looks pretty bad on his team. It would probably be better for Max to win. And also, it makes it incredibly clear to George that, yeah, George, you are very good, but you see what Max is doing, he's pretty good too. So that's the issue for him. And it's interesting because, of course, people were bringing up the comments from shortly before Silverstone 2021 when Toto said, look, all it takes is a Verstappen DNF for this title fight to swing around. Then Silverstone happened a couple of weeks later, and as we know, the rest is history. There was even talk as to whether Toto's going to play a bit of a game here, right? We know that Antonelli has taken out a good couple of drivers this season. Max was among them back at the Austrian Grand Prix, if you remember that one. So, well, maybe Antonelli could pull a bit of a masterclass into Turn 1 next weekend. And even the McLaren guys are saying Andrea Stella doubles down, right? Even before the race, I think Andrea Stella said, look, it's yes in capital letters, but after Baku, it confirms it. We're talking about Max Verstappen. He's got the title chance. And I don't know, McLaren, they're just not a serious team. It strikes me that they're just not a serious organisation, right? Like, they should not be focused on Max. And yeah, maybe the argument, I mean, it's very interesting, right? But if the team wants to win the drivers, it does raise some questions now as to how it treats their drivers. Because think about it this way. The constructors is signed, sealed, delivered. If Max was still 100 points behind, it's very clear that it's a 2-horse race for the title. All of a sudden, there is a potential 3-horse race for this title, right? So arguably, and I'm sure that Piastri might be saying this to the team, or Mark Webber might be saying this to the team, that look, you should prioritize me. If you want to win both championships, which you do, I'm currently a race win ahead of Lando, you should prioritize me on strategy, on decisions made, so we can make sure Max doesn't win. That's absolutely what I'd be saying if I was Piastri. I don't think McLaren are going to do that, and I don't think they should, frankly. I think that they should let their drivers fight for the title. But there will be an argument, if Max closes this up, for Piastri to say, look guys, if we want to end up winning this, you might have to choose your number one man at some point. And yeah, that would be unfortunate for Lando, because a large part of that gap is the DNF that he had in Zandvoort, but sometimes those are the swings and roundabouts of motorsport. Let's talk about Ferrari real quick before we close out. McLaren have had 18 wins in the ground effect era. Ferrari have had 10, so with only 7 races left. I mean, obviously this was not a record that they were going to somehow overhaul, but it is pretty bad, isn't it, really, for Ferrari in this era, given how well it started back in 2022. Now, Vasseur, he's at it again. I know that I often talk about Vasseur's, let's just call them frustrating comments when it comes to Ferrari, but I just thought it was funny because if I had to guess what Vasseur said after Baku, this would have been it. We had the pace to do a much better job in qualifying. That's where the weekend got away from us. It's encouraging. The pace was there, but frustrating. We did not capitalize on it. So, I've never heard that before from Fred Vasseur and Ferrari. The one thing they do have going on in a couple of days' time on Friday is another test. So it's a Pirelli tyre test. It's mainly about 2026, obviously. And it's not like they are going to magically find something that's going to turn their season around this year. But who knows, right? Red Bull found a way mid-season. They understood a little bit more about how the setup should go. They brought a couple of tweaks to their car. That's made a big amount of impact to Max and to Yuki as well. So Friday, they've got these tyre tests at Mugello. Again, they're at Mugello with the SF25, so they may be able to glean some information from that. When they brought their rear suspension in, they did their new one. They did their tyre test, or they did the rear suspension test for a filming day at Mugello. So they might have some data to compare to try and give them a little bit more information on their car. But it's going to be a mule car, the SF25, of course, it's running on next year's tyres. They're going to run it with very low downforce to simulate the 2026 regs. So probably not too much to learn, but both of their drivers will be there driving the SF25, at least trying to get a bit of a feel, a bit of data. Maybe Hamilton can get a little bit more used to the car as well to give the team a slightly better chance of doing something between now and the end of the season. But it's still pretty unlikely that anything dramatic is going to happen between now and the end of the year. It's funny to think that Baku looked pretty promising. They had the 1-2 early on. It was looking good. I think they had the pacing quality as well, had it not been for 2 controversial moments that led to both of them going out of the session. Singapore, though, is considered the other track where this could be plausible. Of course, Norris won around there last year by an absolute country mile. To be fair, he nearly crashed of his own volition while leading. But still, he got away with it and did eventually win the Grand Prix. As I say, he was pulling crazy gaps on last year's Red Bull. But the year before that, of course, it was Carlos Sainz who won in the Ferrari. So maybe there is something in that next weekend. But very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.